Good morning, sanitation economy pioneers. How's everyone feeling after last night? Yes, I'm personally feeling very energized at the opportunity to celebrate all of our entrepreneurs, our disruptors, and the businesses that are building the sanitation economy. So, congratulations to you. And today I've gotten lots of questions from many of you about the money. How do we finance the sanitation economy? Where's the money for sanitation businesses? And that is what our day is about today. So you have to wait no longer. And this morning, I'm really pleased to have a fantastic keynote panel for you. A number of people that have inspired the toilet board and have supported very early on investments in sanitation. And we're going to kick off with them and get the day rolling. If I could invite to the stage Vineet Rai, who is the founder and CEO of AAVISHKAAR, an IntelliCap group, one of the largest impact investors here in India and now the world. Vineet, can you come to the stage? I'd also like to welcome Christian Walder from Asian Development Bank. Asian Development Bank is a steering committee member of the toilet board. And Tom Kress from USAID India, and USAID India is also a steering committee member of the Toilet Board Coalition. So to kick off, and I'll bring the mics over to you. But to kick off, I'd like to ask Vineet Rai to tell us, his story, which has inspired me since the beginning of really how to create impact ecosystems. And AAVISHKAAR has been a pioneer in this, and we've really taken a lot of learnings around building the sanitation economy. So I'd love all of you to hear from him on his journey in building impact ecosystems. And then Vineet, we'd also love to hear from you, as you've worked with probably millions of entrepreneurs now, what it takes to be an entrepreneur that scales to a robust commercial business.
So thank you, Cheryl, for having me. First, let me start by congratulating you. Getting Indians out of their bed 8:30, 9 in the morning is quite a task. We normally would never do it, so you are very courageous. Congratulations. This has been a beautiful event. Thank you for having me in the morning. So my story started a little, I've become quite old now, but my story started when I was quite young, and when you are young, you can do things that logically you shouldn't do. So I was a 28-year-old guy. I'm a forester by training, so I used to live in a forest. Got married. My wife didn't find the forest as enchanting as I did. I was given 45 days to find a job. In Hindi there is a saying, "Marta kya na karda." So I basically found a job with great difficulty in an institute called Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. And then didn't like typing away research papers, so quit the job after 8 months. And luckily, the government of Gujarat, which is a very forward-looking state, was thinking about setting up India's first incubator. And so I applied for the post of manager, and during the interview, the chief secretary and the advisors to the chief minister were asking everybody one question: what is an incubator? And nobody in India knew what an incubator was. But because I worked at IIM Ahmedabad and was part of the guys who did the research paper, so I of course knew what the incubator was. I was the 39th guy in the interview list, and when I turned up, they asked me what is an incubator, and I was the only one who gave the right reply. The advisor to the chief minister came out and said, "You applied for the post of manager?" I said, "Yes." So, well, CEO banoge? Do you want to be the CEO? I was a 26-year-old guy, forester, the backing, had never seen an incubator in my life. I, of course, nodded in the right direction and became the CEO of a government institution reporting to the chief minister and the chief secretary when I was 26-year-old. By that time, my job was to convert farmers' innovations into businesses. This is all 1997, so you can actually relate how long back this was. 4 years, I converted 7 very crude innovations into businesses, learned the hard way how to do business, how to write a project report, etc. By the time I turned 29, I had 2 aha moments. One, I realized that everybody wanted money and every poor wanted to be rich. So my conclusion was, if one of the objectives of starting this incubator was to help farmers, which the government thought was struggling and are poor, so ultimately I was trying to find out how do you make poor people rich. And I concluded to make poor people rich, which is what every poor person wants to be. You need to do something with business because every person who is rich has done business. So that was my conclusion. Nobody in my family had ever done business of whatever history I can track back to. But then I realized business can be created with capital that can take risk. So I went back to my board and I said, guys, everybody wants capital, which is risk-taking to create a business. And then you require talent. And I had a gentleman on my board who said, well, that's problem in Silicon Valley also. Do you know Silicon Valley? I said, no, I don't know where it is. And then they said that what you are talking about, risk capital, it's also called venture capital. So I discovered a new term. My board heard me out and then asked me to actually sit down because they said, your job is not to tell us these preachy stories, but do a good job that you have been doing for the last 4 years. I thought I was the most intelligent guy in the room, so I quit in a huff. And then I come from a family where we do first and think later. So after that, I started thinking about how to start a venture fund. Realized my life saving was $100 or 5,000 rupees, with which I started a fund called AAVISHKAAR because I thought that if you start a fund, I registered this as a venture capital fund. There's a long story behind it, but I won't go into it. And struggled my way to $1 million in 2005. Now, when I started with my $100, my life's vision was to reach $1 million. But the day I reached 2005, it's 26 December 2005, the $1 million, at the same time, an international agency sent a team to study me as a failure. While I was pompously thinking I'm the world's biggest success, there was a team that came to me, and I thought they are interviewing me because I was a great success. And during the process, they said, we are studying big failures where finance is used. And while I defended myself as much as I could, but they told me 3 things. One, you are an outlier because you are not a natural thing. You have jumped from one area to other. You have started with $100. You reached $1 million. It looks great, but what kind of change would you bring with that amount? Forced me to think. So while I defended and I cursed them and I abused them and did whatever, but later once they left, I was forced to think that in a country as big as this, $1 million is not going to make any change. So I started reflecting on what were wrong with me, and I realized I was a good guy trying to invest in good people to help the poor people. Now, instinctively, that seems like a very good strategy, but good people investing in good people is very bad business, which is exactly what was happening to me. We were more interested in hugging the poor rather than building a business. And that was my first learning, that when you are trying to bring about a change, focus not on the poor, but the activity that you believe will change their lives. So business was the focus, and till 2005, I was only focused on the poor. So 2006, I transformed into a good, not such a good guy. I started focusing my activity around building a business. I started looking for entrepreneurs who were trying to build real businesses. And over the next 4 or 5 years, my $1 million jumped to 10, 15, 30, 100, 200. And in the process, I also realized that there are very different ways people are looking at capital. Being a forester, the word ecosystem was quite natural to me. And I realized forest is not about trees. There are birds, there are elephants, there is a tiger, there's a lion, whatever. And you need to actually look beyond the obvious. So it's not about just creating a certain kind of businesses and giving them certain kind of capital. But you have to look at a poor trying to be an entrepreneur, to an entrepreneur who's trying to impact a poor, to an entrepreneur who's trying to deal with a social construct which is difficult, unsolvable, and requires risk, ingenuity, and a willingness to take risks. So all these 3 things made us transform into a group. So AAVISHKAAR today manages roughly around $1.2 billion. We are 6 different entities. We are probably the only guys in the world who focus on Asia and Africa and provide everything from $100 if you're an entrepreneur and want to sell, let's say, flowers to keep your living going and you need $100 every day, we can actually give you $100. And if you're an entrepreneur and you want to take risk and build a business that can impact 1 million lives and need $15 million as equity, we can provide that as well. Yeah, I will stop here.
Thank you. And one thing I've taken away from our conversations over the years, Vineet, is Vineet said, to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem in social impact areas, you need to create talent attractive sectors in order to create investment attractive sectors. So we'll come back to you on that. I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit. What is a talent attractive sector? And how do we make the sanitation economy, or ensure that the sanitation economy is talent attractive? I'd like to next move to Christian, and Christian from Asian Development Bank, have many tools and support water and sanitation in many different ways in the region. And so, I think a lot of the questions that we get from the accelerator program, Acceleratees, around capital is what types of investors would be best suited for my business. And so, Christian, please tell us about the other end of the spectrum.
Definitely. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Cheryl, for having me on this panel. It's really a great pleasure to sit together with such experienced and knowledgeable colleagues and to share some perspectives from ADB operations. I want to focus in the next couple of minutes on several points. On the one hand, I want to give you a quick insight on ADB's water lending, water and sanitation lending, so that you have a rough idea what we are doing in the sector. But then I specifically want to focus on our financing modalities. So we have different tools, products, services, where we actually make the money working. And I would like to explain some of those tools to you. And then linking this back, making one step back to our strategy 2030. You might ask, why is this important in this context? But this is one of the key documents that has been approved in the last year, and this will guide ADB operations throughout the next decade. And the way how this strategy is phrased, what principles, what priorities are embedded in this strategy will significantly change the way how ADB is working, how ADB will design projects, and also how we will monitor our projects. So let's start with the water sector. Water investments, ADB water investments have increased in 2018 to 3.2 billion, which is roughly 15% of ADB's total portfolio. Water is actually the third largest sector after energy and transport in 2018. Specifically, when I talk water, this includes water supply, sanitation, but also flood risk management and irrigation. When thinking or when having a closer look at the water supply and sanitation numbers, they have increased to 1.8 billion in 2018, whereas the largest investments were found in South Asia, particularly in India, with investments over 1 billion. The total ADB South Asia urban and water portfolio that is currently managed by the colleagues from the regional departments and also here from the resident mission is 6.3 billion, with over 80% of this money in the water supply and sanitation sector. So you see there are lots of initiatives ongoing, there is lots of money around, there are lots of projects on the ground, and we are really proud that ADB is one of the key players in the sector in many, many countries across Asia and the Pacific. But then coming to the next topic, there is the question, how do we make this financing, this money work within our project? And as I said already in the introduction, we have different modalities, different ways how we make it work. On the one hand, this might be familiar to you, we have the sovereign operations. That means the public lending, the public financing, which meaning that financing is extended to our developing member countries, to the governments, and also the public sector entities. These instruments are the typical project loans, sector loans, grants, or technical assistance projects. But we also have recently developed other modalities. This is linked a little bit to the new strategy, and also my colleague from the World Bank, Maria Angelica, mentioned this yesterday. I'm talking about results-based lending and policy-based lending. So these new instruments, for example, the results-based lending, specific project outcomes are linked to additional financing, and when talking about policy-based lending, financing is specifically linked to the implementation of policies and guidelines.
Christian, can I just ask you, results-based financing, is that impact bonds? Impact bonds are a trend right now. Development impact bonds, green bonds. That's what you mean by performance-based financing?
No, I would say we make it a little bit easier way. So when we develop our projects, we have certain metrics where we measure the outcomes, the impacts, and the indicators. We define a certain design and monitoring framework, and actually projects are evaluated according to this design and monitoring framework. And when I talk about results-based loans, we select a number of these parameters, indicators that have to be met before, for example, the next tranche is released. Yeah. As I said, this results-based and policy-based loans, this is a little bit a carrot and stick approach. And in order to support the governments in the different developing member countries to increase their capacity and also their institutional knowledge. When going back to Strategy 2030, there is a clear goal to increase private sector operations. And this might be also interesting for you guys here in the room. I think it's obvious that the infrastructure investment needs cannot be met by public financing alone. The private sector has to be crowded in, and there is a clear goal that private sector operations will reach 1/3 of ADB's operations in numbers by 2024. And again, when working together with the private sector, there are different modalities. We have direct loans, guarantees. We can blend long-term loans with concessional interest rates, with ADB financing, or technical assistance support. So this should give you a little bit of an impression what is ongoing. And maybe just, I want to make one point.
Can I just ask one more question? And what would be on the loans, for example, or guarantees? I mean, what would be the size, the minimum size of a deal? So can you do loans or guarantees for $1 million? Does it need to be 10 million, 50 million?
I think in terms of the size, we are quite flexible, but nevertheless, as an ADB, we also want to scale up. So we want to see the impact, we want to scale, and I would say we have certain products and services, and I will try to explain them now, where we can also work with smaller amounts, but in general, we are talking about size and about scaling up business.
20 million, 50 million, yeah.
But also based on the current strategy that we are having, one key pillar of this strategy is to promote and to include innovative and advanced technologies into our project. And this actually is a great opportunity for many of you guys, because this is a clear mandate for us to have a closer look what is going on in the sector, what is going on in the field. How can we get new technologies? How can we get innovations? How can we implement them in our projects? And this is not just a policy document that is floating around. This is one key pillar of ADB Strategy 2030. So this is one of the key documents. And based on this, several modalities and new tools have been developed. We work together already with startups and innovative companies when financing pilot studies in order to make a proof of concept. But just recently, ADB launched the Technology Innovation Challenge, and the object is actually to award 3 grants for $500,000 each to proposals demonstrating innovative technologies to address energy-related development challenges that ADB has published. One initiative. The second initiative, ADB is currently preparing the ADB Ventures program. This initiative will help early-stage companies to scale technology in Asia and the Pacific for sustainable development. So this is a clear shift of, let's say, the way how ADB is working to really crowd in this innovative and new technologies. And not to forget, and this is actually the last point, then I give the mic over to Tom. ADB, we have a track record of 50 years working in the area here. So what we definitely want to do is to be an important platform to bring together government, academia, institutions, but specifically also private sector and entrepreneurs. So for example, we organize conferences, host exhibitions, and host events where people can come together, people can network and show and showcase the latest technologies and get in touch with the key stakeholders from many different countries.
Thank you. And ADB will be hosting our member meeting in Manila in March. So one of those conferences we might be able to leverage. And so I hope all of you in the room that whose businesses are in the region just heard that. A lot of new packages there of money for innovators. So you're going to want to talk to Christian at the break. Next, moving to Tom. I mean, USAID has been an incredible supporter. I think what we've been so impressed with at USAID and being involved in our steering committee is the tentacles of your network that you're able to bring to bear to really support the business innovations in sanitation and building the sanitation economy. And as I mentioned in my remarks on Tuesday, we have just renewed our agreement with USAID, which we're really happy to announce is an increased commitment to building out the sanitation economy in specific key markets. So really grateful for USAID's support of the toilet board and our vision for the sanitation economy. Tom, I wanted you to talk today. You are the head of WASH at the India mission here, and to really talk about how USAID is supporting local financial market strengthening here in India, and in particular some of the mechanisms that you are deploying to do that.
Right now, USAID India is going through kind of a shift. I think if you go back 10 years, you'd see a lot of work within our mission focused on trying to get past the usual way USAID did its work and the way I think USAID currently does its work in a lot of other countries, which is with international or American-based NGOs coming in and doing the work, and it's this some consultation with host governments, but for the most part, it's this sort of bilateral relationship between the two partners doing a development program in the field. Things are much different here in India. Like I said, I guess if you go back 10 or 15 years, just a lot of focus on working with Indian partners, businesses, NGOs, etc. And India is a place where you can do that, where other places it's not so easily done. Then I think the focus sort of shifted towards direct partnerships with government partners. In the WASH sector, that was especially true because of the Swachh Bharat mission, the increased focus on sanitation, and so starting about 5 years ago in the WASH sector, we really started working very, very closely with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs to support their work to end open defecation by 2019 with the Swachh Bharat mission. And so that went fairly well. But we also continue to work with the government of India, and their focus on Swachh Bharat, as you all know, has sort of shifted towards ODF plus, ODF plus plus, and sustaining the open defecation-free status, and then dealing with fecal sludge. And as you all know, that requires a lot of work with the private sector. And so right now, before most of our money was really focused on this sort of direct support for the Swachh Bharat mission. And so now we're sort of shifting towards innovative financing and work to work with the private sector. And so a few new mechanisms are coming online that will support that this year. So we're starting a loan guarantee that will work with Indian banks and non-banking financial companies that will lend to private businesses operating in the WASH sector.
Mike?
Sorry. Including water provision, working in water provision, sanitation collection, transport, treatment, WASH-focused behavior change, and menstrual hygiene management. We're also going to start work to provide technical assistance to the banks and entrepreneurs working in that space. Sorry?
Fantastic.
Yeah, and then we'll probably invest in some development innovation bonds along the way as well.
Great. So development impact bonds, guarantees. This is a huge need. I think what both of you have said about your banks and institutions coming into this space, it still needs catalytic capital. It still needs blended finance between, public sector finance and commercial. And you probably, talked to many of the companies now over the last couple of days, and there's a lot of innovative mechanisms brewing, that need this blended finance boost to it. What we found is actually impact investors are really interested, but they still need the guarantees of these guys. They still need these innovative bond structures, et cetera, because it's still too risky. Unfortunately, they haven't heard your talk, Vineet, about taking more risk. So really needed. And as the toilet board, we're committed, to help to broker, these innovative relationships between our Accelerate businesses and our network of partners, but also the large corporates who are also playing a strategic investment role. How does that de-risk some of these investments? I think we haven't fully leveraged the power of this triangle. So really that is going to be part of our focus. And so please come to us and make yourselves known if you have an investment need. I'd like to go back to Vineet now. Vineet, to talk a little bit about this. How can we make sanitation a talent attractive sector? Like, how do we get the top talent into this sector, so that investors don't see the businesses as risky, one. And number two, what does it take to be an entrepreneur that does scale up and does have commercial success in your experience of taking, working in sectors, serving the poor and really growing now?
So let's actually start by asking, why is it that we are struggling to create value in the sanitation economy? I mean, it's not that we started going to the toilet just now, or we discovered that we go to the toilet. We have been doing that since the time human beings started walking, so before even walking actually. The challenge is simply that we never saw it as an activity from which you can generate revenue, wealth, etc. And so the first and the key question is, any sector which is not exciting, somebody has to come out with a statement which is inspirational enough to bring about a change. In India, probably the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan in some sense at least appealed to the general public's sentiments and also galvanized a lot of us to come together. I've been doing this investments much earlier, but this is almost said one individual trying to fight a battle. That doesn't make sense. So somebody who's at the right stature has to make a clarion call to galvanize the forces, both capital as well as thought leadership, especially in large, powerful institutions, to all think about this space as interesting. Once that starts happening, something that was seen as a taboo would actually start being seen as an opportunity. And I think that change and shift has started happening in the sanitation economy. The second thing that you start looking for is role models, and there a person like Rajiv Khair, who's also sitting in the audience, becomes very important and crucial. You need to have somebody who's young. It's not that in India we didn't have a sanitation entrepreneur. We have Sulabh Shauchalaya, which has been around for a very long period of time. But I think anybody who's young looks for leadership or idolizes somebody who is of similar age, youthful, young, articulate, and you can identify with. So the Gandhian thought process was there. It is not new. There has been significant intervention, some very successful as well. But to me, the new sanitation economy needed a leader who was more relatable, had the same background, has struggled through, and yet chose to stand up. And I think Rajiv, therefore, in that sense, will go down in history as somebody who inspired a lot of people to look at sanitation in a completely different manner.
And you invested in Saraplast early on, if I'm not wrong. When did you invest in Saraplast?
I think it must be 2009 or 10. I don't remember exactly. 9, right? Yeah. So my challenge I started looking for an entrepreneur in sanitation because I was taking some of my LPs for a tour, and they actually said, "You guys claim you are a 5,000-year-old civilization. See," and we were going early in the morning from Delhi to towards UP, and they said, "See, how can you actually say you're a 5,000-year-old civilization when half of India is actually sitting and shitting around the roads?" And it was quite an insulting thing, and I started thinking that, and it hurt me quite a lot, and I started looking for an opportunity to at least do something in that space. And of course I searched and couldn't find anybody who was interested. And then I stumbled across Rajiv Kher around exactly the same time. And in some sense, it's very serendipitous when you start thinking about something and an opportunity also walks in at the same time. So our investment in Rajiv was largely driven by two things happening. One, me feeling very bad about my own country, and then I finding a very young, very articulate man who actually chose to fight the same problem in a very unique way. So that's how the investment happened. To be talent accretive, you need to find a way to change the perception and make that perception shift towards positivity. And Rajiv did some, but I think Cheryl, you can also take a lot of credit, because you have to glamorize for youth to participate. And that's what impact investing also managed to do. One of the reasons we have been able to we were an unknown quantity. The term impact investing actually got coined as late as 2008, so almost the time I invested in Rajiv. We came up with a term that identifies us, and it was just 15 of us in one room who chose the name because somebody was willing to put $1 billion and they liked the term impact. So we basically said, you have $1 million, you are willing to blow that $1 billion behind this name, we'll all call ourselves impact investment. And that's how impact investing as a term got coined in Bellagio in Italy, in a room funded by Rockefeller Foundation. So that's how we all accepted it. And that $1 million made a huge difference, because impact investing was used and used and used. And if you go on YouTube at that time, you would only have impact investing at the top. So in my view, somebody has to stand up and actually take a position, and then you have to glamorize the statement. And I think sanitation, in my view, you might have to still come up with a better name than sanitation economy, which probably will start making impact. So today, if you go to Harvard, Stanford, impact investing is literally a craze. I would call it, to an extent, it's a fad now. Everybody wants to be in impact investing without really understanding what impact investing is.
So that brings me to, the comment about entrepreneurs. So, impact investors are still investors. They're not throwing money at business models that aren't robust and don't have the right financials sort of behind them. And so, can you talk a little bit about that, about really what it takes to be an entrepreneur? I think we have in sanitation, many of the business models are new, and many of the entrepreneurs are new. So, what advice would you have for the entrepreneurs in the room?
So I think the first thing is you have to know how to tell a story, and that's the first and the most important thing. Having a technology, having a product, all that is important, but more important, to raise capital, you need to tell a story. The second most important thing is you have to be able to execute on the story. So if you are an entrepreneur, and if you want to be a good entrepreneur and a successful one, if you don't know how to tell a story, you will never raise money. And if you don't know how to execute on the story, you will never raise the second round. So if you want to survive, you will have to raise multiple rounds of capital. And therefore, first, you have to tell a story that you believe in. I have met and heard many entrepreneurs who tell a story which I want to hear. That's the worst thing you can do to yourself, because you don't really ever know what I want to hear. So just going to my website and trying to make a judgment on what I'm trying to hear is a very flawed thing, and it is very easy for us because we meet 100 entrepreneurs a week. So to look through and see what is wrong with the presentation. So never try to please an investor, try to please yourself. Your conviction shines through, and if you really believe in what you're doing, at some point of time you will be able to reach through to the investor. Remember that investors draw their confidence on a future of a business based on your conviction. We per se don't have any conviction. We have theses. We will have a thesis. So I want to make an impact. I have a thesis to make an impact. If you can convince me that your idea fits into my thesis, for which you don't need to know my thesis. You need to know your idea better. A lot of mistakes happen when people don't have great belief in their own idea and thesis. The second thing, which is I think equally important, is how well-rounded you are in your thinking. So it's not about you alone, it's about the team that you have brought together. It is about how you will go around building it up. It is also about being ambitious but not being outrageous. So being over-conservative or outrageous, both doesn't work. You need to be therefore ambitious within your limits. And if you are very early stage, that means you don't have a proof of concept, you have not sold anything, then your background starts playing a very important role in how we will perceive. Money can be invested by an investor at any stage. It doesn't matter. It could just be a pure concept. It could be nothing. I trust your background. I trust your conviction. I may invest in you. Or you have sold something. Or you can convince us that there is a huge scale opportunity. Any of the three things would lead to investment. But as time passes, the more you have demonstrated on your story. So don't forget about the story you told the first time. You have to keep coming back to the same story. It's been 19 years for me. I still tell the same story that I told in 2001, except adding a few things every year. So if you can't repeat yourself, people will soon see through. So these are some of the advices I would like to give to anybody who's trying to be an entrepreneur.
Thank you, Vineet. So I think what we've heard here is we have, venture capital, impact investing, and the types of criteria that you have. We've heard from a large multilateral bank and new tools for also investing in this sector and in particular entrepreneurs. And aid organization that can really provide that blended capital support to really strengthen and round out the financing stack. And so what we want to do at the Toilet Board, as I said, is bring these pieces together and do it faster. We said at the beginning our theme is scale and speed, and that includes financing. And so, Vineet, we have a proposition for you because these organizations are already on what we loosely call our investment committee because we're not actually investing as the Toilet Board, but all of the people on the investment committee are. And we'd love to have AAVISHKAAR on there to help us in sanitation think through taking more risk and how we can help the investors around the table to take more risk and de-risk via the Toilet Board Coalition. Thank you very much for being here, and we will have these gentlemen here for the rest of the morning. Thank you very much.